the reality is the agents don't follow up and don't do the things that you said. They look at that as like, oh, you got an agent, see you later. And
Yep.
I've made a career, literally an entire career of working with people that had a bad experience with another agent. If you're not getting educated about local and national real estate market conditions and changes in processes, which we're dealing with right now, whether you're in title, mortgage, obviously a real estate agent, or any other profession where you advise people, you're doing yourself and your client base a disservice. This is the Knowledge Brokers Podcast. I'm Tom Toole here with Lisa Chinatti, who I will now be introducing first on every pod moving forward because of her complaint about alphabetical order, which I don't get. Lisa, great to have you here. Byron's jet setting again, CEO life of Now Bam. We're here holding it down, and we've had like some different news this week for once. We're not so much talking about what's happening next in the commission settlement. We are seeing some changes from some big players like Zillow with their new touring agreement, which we're going to get to next. But first, we had a Fed meeting this week. Usually the Fed meeting is like the most important news that we've covered on the pod historically, and we both did our research here. Lisa, congratulations on listening to 3/4 of those minutes, because Jerome Powell is a snoozer. And when you talk to him, the Federal Reserve did not change rates at all, which is not a surprise. Everyone kind of expected that. And there was some comments from Jerome Powell. I'm going to read you the first comment that caught my attention, Lisa. Then I want to get your reaction and hear what you thought of the minutes. So specifically, there was a question from Courtenay Brown at Axios. And she said, I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned earlier on housing inflation. There's kind of been this long-awaited disinflation in shelter that still hasn't arrived. So I got two questions. How do you explain the substantial lags between some of the private sector data we're seeing and the government data? And how confident are you that rents will be helpful on the inflation front in the coming months? Which I thought was a really great question because we know how lagged that data is. So I'll give you the short version of what Jerome Powell said, because we'd be here forever if we were to quote him exactly. But basically, he said there's a difference between actual rent and market rent, which I disagree with. I think that's a bad answer, because market rents are what people are renting properties for right now. And he said that those market rents take years to get all the way into rents for tenants who are rolling over for their leases. Landlords don't tend to charge as much of an increase to a rollover tenant for whatever reason, which is true. And what that does, it builds up a sort of unrealized portion of increases when there have been big increases. And it's complicated, but the story is it takes time for that data to get in. Now, I am confident that as long as market rents remain low, this is going to show up in measured inflation, assuming the market rents do remain low. This has been one of the big questions that Byron's had about the Fed. Lisa, what did you think about this question in particular? What did you think about the news conference? Tell me more.
Well, I thought the question was super impactful. A great question, like you said, relevant for us, obviously, since this is what we do. My take on it is very similar to your take on it. It's an interesting stance. How about that? I think the nuts and bolts behind it, my big takeaways were, I don't think we're going to see cuts anytime soon. I think everybody is very, very clear on that at this point. I think he was great talking about the hardships that consumers or Americans are feeling based upon inflation still staying too high. I was feeling positive about the fact that he pretty much said that while there's no cuts on the horizon, there's no increases that are really on the horizon either, which, given the inflation data, I thought it could have gone either way, right? Powell spoke a lot about how waiting for the full end of the quarter was a big part of it. And I'm glad that they're taking that stance on it, that they weren't just looking at the data from 1 or 2 months, but that they were really looking at all of the data together. So huge positive on that front. And I think given what we've been seeing, it's possible that we could have ended up with some hikes out of it, and that they could have increased rates, because inflation isn't going anywhere. It's stubborn. It's stubborn.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because when you look at real estate transactions, right? And there's things like different certifications we need to get, and different fees with townships or cities or counties or whatever you're dealing with. All those things are going up, and
Yep.
and you're seeing it happen across the board, and people don't realize it. I do agree inflation is a little stubborn right now. I think people are starting to feel it again a bit, and the reality is, I'm with you. I'm glad they weren't start talking about rate hikes again, because that would have been a real problem for the housing market for sure. If we started to see them talk about bringing rates up, I'm glad that the Fed is taking hey, we've made all these actions. We've got to let this play out.
Yep.
The flip side is too, when they look at inflation, shelter costs and measuring the whole quarter is really important, especially in real estate when we're in these spring markets, Lisa, that you and I know tend to do a lot of business in because we're in the Northeast, a little different than other parts of the country. So I was glad about that. I do agree with you. And I think this is, again, Byron's hit on this a lot, and I agree. If I see one more person say, marry the house, date the rate. I've seen this like making a comeback again, though. Have you noticed this? Like, some people are saying, oh, well, we'll just you have to realize that these rates aren't going down, and they're going to stay here. Now, they're stable. I think that's the bonus for a lot of folks, is that we're not seeing that volatility we saw. Last year it was like they were up and down a half a point week to week constantly, which is not good for the economy when it's that volatile. So I'm glad to see we're seeing some stability here. All these people that were talking about 5% rates. We took I think we took the under on the. We have to look up what the bets were at the beginning of the year. The over under on mortgage rates. Whoever took the over, wherever we set it, maybe Haley can look it up and message it to us here. That's going to be, I think we're seeing these rates the rest of the year, maybe sixes by the end of the year if we're in good shape. I don't see this changing anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I was over. I don't
You
remember.
were over. Byron and I took the under. I don't remember what the line was. So that's going to be the most important thing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to look back. I think positives for what shook out of Powell's statements. We did see a little bit of softening in rates yesterday, or a little bit of a decrease in rates, which was super positive. I'm actually just looking because the job report just came out this morning too, and I hadn't actually looked at that until we just started talking. It came out about an hour ago.
Well, looks like there was 175,000 jobs added in April. This is the headline, so I have to, and it looks like that Wall Street's rallying as a result. So, and the market did rally after the comments, which I was a little surprised about as well, Lisa. So I think there's, what I see with the market rally and what's happening now is that people are okay with what's going on, because they're not micromanaging everything. What happened before is we're gonna overly increase rates, or we're gonna cut them too fast.
Right
now, they're letting things play out, which good business owners let their decisions play out. I think that's a really important thing here.
You know what? So reading the jobs report real quick, it was actually super positive. Well, strike that. It was good for rates. How about that? So
yeah, unemployment rising is not positive, but it's silly that we have to even make that sort of caveat here when we're talking about this, because that's what the Fed and rates want. I don't think it's good. Unemployment went up to 3.9%. So what's your you're the prognosticator here, Lisa. How do you interpret this jobs report? And what are you saying to your clients right now as you skim through this for the first time live on the show?
Yeah. Well, so to your point, we added 175,000 jobs, but the estimates had been 250. So that's actually it's a decent sized gap. Unemployment rate rose from 3.8% to 3.9%. So a small increase, but an increase nonetheless. In Powell's comments the other day, when I was listening back to his speech, he had talked about supply and demand with respect to labor and ability to fill jobs. So this kind of plays into that a little bit. The average hourly raise or pay increased only 7 cents. And so it was interesting because it pushed that down from 4.1% to 3.9%, which is the lowest increase that we've had since June of 2021. Wage growth has slowed, but it's still above the 3.5%. But we're getting closer, right? At least now we're in the threes. Yes. Fed wants 3.5. We had been 4.1, but now we're getting to 3.9. So super impactful to see that that's coming down. I'm going to guess that there's going to be some really good news for mortgage rates today.
Yeah, and I think this is the kind of stuff heading into the weekend here for the knowledge brokers out there. I'd be looking at that. And if rates, I'll just give you our local quotes that we had yesterday here. We get quoted every day, which is something I'd be, if I was selling real estate, which we are, I'd be constantly getting updated from my go-to lender. So yesterday we were seeing 7%, right? I think
Yep.
we'll probably dip into the high sixes today. And based on that, and this is local, and that's like the perfect scenario. You got the best credit, best income, all that stuff. Just to be very
Good down
clear.
payment. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. So, but the bonus here is that we got weekend shoppers, right? I mean, and there's people out there. We're in the middle of May, or the beginning of May, when in the middle of the spring market, I should say. I'd be sending out some communication. Hey, rates have come down. Once you get that quote, I'm not sure if this would be for you, but there might be an opportunity to get a little bit of a lower payment if you see a home that you like, and just go into that sort of opportunity updates with market information locally, because when you do that, that's where the follow-up really can get pretty exciting for people and turn into some results.
Yeah. Reading. Sorry, still reading.
Still reading. So I'll fill the airtime here
Yeah.
while Lisa reads on the show. And when this economic news comes down, we said this before, but what I'm going to suggest everyone listening to this here: speak in terms that your clients can understand. Be clear and concise with this. You don't want to get into, well, yesterday Chairman Powell spoke and blah, 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 blah. No, you've lost most people when you say that. Hey, the Fed had a meeting yesterday. They held rates and the market reacted, and we've seen mortgage rates come down a little bit. Would you be interested in looking at homes that are now fitting into your monthly payment budget, right? Like, that's like a simple way to explain this here. It's your classic OFQ, and the more clear and concise and short you are asking questions, the better off you're going to be. Have you finished reading the report, Lisa?
Yep. Now I'm good.
Okay. What do you got?
Well, so interesting. One of Ian Shepherdson said, I love this comment, again, for interest rates, not for consumers. The report is nothing like bad enough to trigger a wholesale rethink at the Fed, but things will be different if the July numbers are weaker still, as we expect. So interesting kind of thoughts for what they think is going to go on. Healthcare and social assistance led the gains. Transportation and warehousing was in the middle. Retail was in the middle, and construction at 9,000. So fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what we're seeing happen here is that, I mean, we're seeing the jobs market kind of the jobs market's been so resilient, and it's been a little bananas in terms of, even in this inflation, how rates were or wages were rising, and unemployment's not dropping, and it was continuing to happen over and over again. And now what we see is that maybe it is a little lagged, like Chairman Powell's talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this data is a little lagged because we know that people don't always file for unemployment right away. I mean, just for in our day to day, that they might have a couple jobs they're trying to figure out, and it's it's an interesting thing. So this could be maybe a sign of things to come. I'm not sure. I'm glad to see rates coming down. This is going to be a wait and see approach with the economy. And the good news here is that it's a lot more stable than where we were 12 months ago. And I think certainty will create a lot more intent in the marketplace for the knowledge brokers that are listening. You just got to know how to talk about it. That's really going to be the most important thing here. Anything you want to add, Lisa?
No, that wraps up job stuff. Like I said, it's positive in that it's moving rates in the right direction, but it's not catastrophic. And I think it's the one thing that we've all kind of been watching, right? No one wants massive job losses, but we do need that labor market to soften up a little bit. And as a business owner, it would be a welcome change. Just going to toss that out there as well. Hiring is still tricky. I know you face it. We have open positions here within the company that we've been trying to fill, and it's not as easy as it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, the hiring thing is tough because I think the demands people have are unrealistic. I don't know how to explain this because it's become the norm in some places, or maybe folks don't know what to expect when they get into the workforce, or maybe they don't like to work at organizations like yours and mine where we have expectations and we actually follow through on them, because that's another thing that happens in a lot of places. So I've seen requests like, hey, I need like 6 weeks off vacation. I'm like when is anyone ever? I mean, this is real life. And or, I want to have a hybrid schedule when that's not anywhere being advertised. I mean, I don't know if you run into that, but it's like people start to just think like, oh, well, this is the norm. Well, yeah, you might be able to get that other places, but as a business owner, That's where you got to set really clear expectations up front. And, when we both run EOS in our businesses, tying things to math, having scorecards, knowing
Yep.
what the expectations are, because it's real easy to sit around and fuck off at work right now. And you got to be very careful of that.
100%. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Demands definitely there. Skill sets, slight misalignments on skill sets, even I'm finding. Folks coming right out of college expecting to move into management positions. To your point, hybrid schedules. I think it's often the difference between working in corporate America, and here's going to be my segue to the next part of it. Corporate America, where things operate a little bit differently than they do in small business, where we're boots on the ground and very connected to what's going on. I know before the show started, you and I were chatting about that Zillow announcement that came out with their touring and agreement, and how fascinating in corporate America, where the public finds out at the same time as the employees, versus small business. I don't think I would ever announce something publicly without discussing it with every member of the company internally first. But seems like that might have been what shook out this week.
Well, so this is big news in that I think Zillow's trying to make a statement. And to be very clear, Lisa and I are both partners with Zillow. We have partnerships at our companies with them. With that in mind, they came out with this one-page touring agreement. I had a call with our rep, and she says, "Hey, I found out the same way you did." I'm like, "Really? You found out on realestatenews.com?" And she said, "Yes." And I was like, "Wow." And so, I sometimes I feel for some of these reps. I think every rep takes their job a little differently when they work with teams like ours. And, it's like, and I'm sure she's getting beat up by all these other people that are giving her a hard time. I mean, you got to know what you're dealing with. So I think that's number one. The touring agreement. So I read through this. We had an all hands team meeting yesterday, like we do every month, talking about this. It's one page.
Yeah.
I see some positives here in this for Zillow partners. I also see some things where if it's not handled right, you might have some challenges. So the agreement, it's literally 5 paragraphs. Paragraph 1. Sole purpose of this agreement is for broker to consult with buyer regarding specific properties and assist buyer in locating and touring properties. These are called touring services. In connection with the touring services, broker shall adhere to any and all non-waivable duties under applicable state laws. For working with a consumer in a non-agency capacity, and buyer and broker are not entering into an agency relationship. 2, buyer represents the buyer has not signed an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement for the location currently in force with another broker. I see that as a positive in some ways.
Yes, and I think what I will toss out on Zillow's behalf is I think when I was hearing and reading, and I was involved in a bunch of text messages and, groups about this, I think a lot of folks were missing that one statement right there. And I think that sentence, paragraph, whatever we want to call it, is one of the defining marks of this agreement.
Totally agree. We'll unpack that in a second. And you know what? That's a typical real estate agent that doesn't read anything and overreacts. Congratulations. Yep. Knowledge brokers read it though, like you and I. That to me is a big lift here. Duration of the agreement is 7 days. No fee for the touring services. A lot of people got worked up about that. Newsflash agents, you don't get paid to show properties unless you work for Redfin or like that Show Ami app, right? Do you get paid to show properties, Lisa? I don't get paid to show properties.
Nope.
Imagine how rich our team members would be if they got paid for every single showing.
$25 right? A door, $50 a door.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It depends. Some people are showing a lot of properties. I don't know. I mean, but the point is, if that was how we earn money, and that's not how you earn money in this business, they'd be doing well. So the point is that, and then there's an equal opportunity clause, which is normal in, at least in Pennsylvania agreements, I'd imagine every other state as well. So
totally.
I like clause 2. And I see some opportunity here because one of the big complaints that people have, and I don't know if you guys get calls like this. I'd imagine you do. Hey, my realtor's out of town. I need to get into the property. And, that's bad business if you're that agent and don't have any coverage when your clients are looking. And that's how you lose business. So I think that's a negative for those people, but a positive for anyone working with Zillow, because now you don't have to ask that horrible question, Lisa. So, hey, Lisa and Steve, are you working with an agent right now? Like, it's one of the worst questions you can ask because it's all about you, not about the consumer. I love number 2 for people that know their scripts. How are you interpreting this with your team? What are you doing now to work with this touring agreement, Lisa? Because I know it's something we're talking about as well.
Yeah. So on the same page, I think that when you understand the nuts and bolts of it, I think there's some positives here. I think the one caveat that I'm tossing out for absolutely everybody, both in the company and outside of the company, is to be aware that I don't necessarily, it'll be interesting to see whether each state, like I sent this along to my attorney, I'm not sure that this would comply fully with all of the requirements.
Yes, I do agree with that. Do you
Um,
have like a consumer notice or anything people have to sign, or an agency disclosure?
we
So you're
do.
supposed to do that in Pennsylvania. So I don't know how you give them this without giving the state document there. And that was the feedback I had given to our Zillow rep, because now they're playing attorney in 50 different states. It's one of the things you want to avoid as an agent. Keep going, Lisa.
Yep. I question, and I think we need to dive in a little bit deeper on the requirements of NAR to have an agency agreement and whether this will fully cover it. But what I will add is I do believe that the consumer has a deep respect for Zillow. And I think the fact that Zillow is coming out with this and saying, we understand, and they're putting the consumer on notice that things need to be addressed a little bit differently. I think it's a positive that Zillow is getting the consumer to sign, or giving the consumer something to sign beforehand. It's say old sales methodologies, right? It's the small little asks before you get up to the big ask. And every sorry, one of those small asks ahead of time makes it easier to get to the big ask at the end. So this coupled with agency disclosures, this and all of the other disclosures that are required by the state, I think helps agents get one step closer. But I think it's super important that agents understand that this isn't going to replace, and I don't think it's meant to replace, a true agency agreement.
Yeah, I agree. And that's exactly what our Zillow rep told me. I think it's more, they want to be compliant. And I think that they're one of the biggest questions we got with this NAR settlement was, what about Zillow? Because they think they're booking a tour. And as much as we believe consumers are aware, and I would argue they're more aware than they were a couple months ago about this, some people have no idea. So and Zillow is a brokerage, right? I mean, they're a brokerage in all 50 states. So they can't just pick and choose the laws they follow. So I do agree. I think it's a smart thing to do on their end. Now, the flip side is, there's going to be some people that if you got to still think how you show up at this appointment, right? I mean, to me, it's, touring services. What have we heard? But showing time is not a skill. Learning how to work showing time is not a skill. Door openers have kind of gone by the wayside after the COVID market, and there was a lot of people that just did that and did really well, but that market has changed a lot. So now that you have, all right, you've gotten in, you've got some sort of agreement in place to get in there, so you're over that hurdle. What are you doing next to win the client? And this is how real estate has always been, right? Are you getting them into the office? Are you having an onboarding meeting with them? What are you doing there to get these folks interested and show them, hey, here's all the things we do differently that I can help you with. It's not just about touring homes. So it's going to come down to the same thing we've been talking about for months on this pod. How are you showing up at your initial meeting? And the more you do that, the more you got your appointment down, you know what to say, you're stacking the cool, you're asking a question. You turned me on to this one, Lisa. Were there any other homes you wanted to tour while we're out? Really important question. Are you bringing, the right documents? Are you walking people through the process? Are you talking about the 4 components of a buyer presentation, which are the goals, the lending process, what's happening in the market, and the purchase process? Because that's the components there. Most people skip over that stuff. So this, to me, is actually an easier setup. And the fact that you're going to vet out if they have an agent or not, to me, is a big lift for people that want to be great buyers agents and serve consumers.
The interesting tie-in, I was out this week and President's Club with the company, and I received an email, and I know you were actually, I think you were a part of it. It was either you or Byron, I'm not sure. The pilot program that Zillow was running on lost transactions. Was that you or was that Byron?
That was not me.
Okay. So it was interesting. I received an email from my Zillow rep, and it had a link to a spreadsheet that showed 10 transactions. I think it was 10 or 15, something in there, where our company received the lead inbound as a flex connection. And in less than 4 months, I think it was probably an average of about 3 months from the time that we received the connection until the time that that consumer closed. And they were consumers who didn't choose to transact with my company or the agent that they were initially connected to.
Okay.
And so fascinating to kind of start to look through it. So what I did is I was, sitting there and I pulled up each one and was going through. Now there were some legitimate misses, and I was able to kind of start to create some conversations internally about where did we drop the ball. And Zillow had a drop down on the side to ask about what my opinion was for why we lost the opportunity. Some questions about what Zillow could have done to help us retain the opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. But I believe the number was 5. So maybe about 50% of the opportunities.
Hmm.
We didn't get the business because very early in the notes, the consumer noted that they already had an agent. And one of the drop downs was consumer was working with another agent. And so it was really interesting to kind of look at that out of these lost opportunities, there were a good chunk where the agent had already come in. And I think I listened to one of the phone calls and the consumer said it right away in the phone call. I'm already working with an agent. They're just out of town, to your point earlier. We rejected the lead. We tried, offered to show the property to the consumer anyway, followed up to make sure that they had been able to get into the property. But we couldn't win the business, right? And sometimes we can win the business back, treat them like their agent better than
Yes.
their own agent does. But that's less common than it is that the consumer stays with the agent, right? And so it'll be interesting to see. When I sent that feedback back, my rep had said one of the strategies from Zillow is to start to try to suss those out a little bit more. So I think that this is one step in that direction to start to deliver higher quality connections to agents and start to educate the consumer in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it from Zillow's perspective, it's going to increase conversion with their partners because
Correct.
if you look at, okay, we gave you X amount of connections per month, and you and I both get graded on this all the time. And even if you're in market-based pricing, they want to be able to sell that product. So if you're not seeing conversion from there, it's going to be a challenge. You're going to see that it's actually, okay, maybe it's a little less, but there's plenty of leads out there.
Yep.
But this question is different than, are you working with an agent? This is the difference here. And for every time you said you actually followed up and treated that person better than their agent, there's other times where it's a defense mechanism, or they're on a property drip and they
100%.
think they're working with somebody, or they met somebody once and they feel obligated to work with them. And the reality is the agents don't follow up and don't do the things that you said. They look at that as like, oh, you got an agent, see you later. And
Yep.
I've made a career, literally an entire career, of working with people that had a bad experience with another agent. It's a little different on the listing side, but there's a lot of bad agents out there, right? 87% are out of the business in 5 years. So that means of all the agents out there, 1 in 10 have a chance of making it, right? One and a half in 10, right? So you can cut one of your agents in half, Lisa, and that's gonna, that'll be the other portion. But the point is that you've got to ask better questions. And the question, do you have an agent, is a horrible question. It's just as bad as, are you pre-approved? It's getting right to what you need to know to think if it's worth your time, instead of, how can I help this person navigate a confusing real estate market? So here's some alternatives to that. Now, Zillow is going to vet this out, but there's also other lead sources and people that aren't partners with Zillow. So,
Right.
hey, Lisa, how have you been looking at homes so far? That's going to tell you a lot, right? Very open-ended. Are you planning on paying cash or financing? Very different than, are you pre-approved,
Yep.
right? But how have you been looking for homes? Or tell me about your search so far. What have you seen that you liked? What have you seen that you don't like? Like, just ask questions about their needs, and it's going to come out. But most salespeople don't listen, Lisa. They talk way too much, and they want to make it about them. So this is going to be a lift for Zillow partners, but it's also very enlightening that we're past this COVID market of, all right, you're working with an agent. Sorry, they got to show it to you. Like, it was so, disappointing the way some people talk to the consumer in that scenario. And they just made it all about them. My time's worth more than yours. And fortunately for the business, a lot of those people are no longer selling real estate.
Agreed. One other point that I'll point out about paragraph 2 of the agreement that I think is super important to note. Buyer represents that buyer has not signed an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. I know one of the things that we're working on in the company, I'm pretty sure you're working on it as well, is the difference between an exclusive and a non-exclusive, where our non-exclusives represent that if we show the buyer the property, if we, bring
Procure it,
them to
get
the
them in there.
buyer,
Yeah.
yep, then we're entitled to compensation. But that consumer is still free to work with 2, 3, 5, 10 other agents. And if our agents can't provide the value, can't be the ones putting the consumer in front or the property in front of the consumer, then we're not worthy of compensation. And I think that that's going to be a big thing that shakes out on a move forward and hopefully helps to elevate consumer experience, because what's one of the biggest complaints consumers always have? I did all the work. I found the property. My agent just opened the door. And
Yep.
so I think it's going to be super. And this is going to be one more aspect of that, where, again, spelling out the verbiage here. It's not that the buyer has signed a buyer brokerage agreement with another agent. It's very definitively spelling out that it's an exclusive one. So just something to pay attention to and help agents understand skills and kind of think about things that they need to be aware of as they move forward.
Well, it's funny because as soon as this news broke, I'm getting like texts from our team and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and I think that's. I mean, we found out when they did, so I
Yep.
appreciate people to pay attention. And there's been like sentiment like, oh, I'm not going to work with someone on a non-exclusive agreement. Hey, newsflash agents, you've already been doing that for years by not getting a contract signed. So
Yep.
you've been already doing it. Don't worry about, oh, well, I got to get this exclusive agreement. You know what matters? Serving the client. You do that, you're going to win more business than you lose. And I think
100%.
that's where agents really get it backwards. So I don't think this is really going to mean much of a difference other than it gives you a little more intel to vet through this. I see it as a win if you know what you're dealing with, but you got to understand the contracts. Like you and I just broke this down very clearly. There's going to be some agents don't even read this thing. And that's the problem. It was, I made a comment on the Kevin Sears interview last week where he was saying a lot of agents don't look at the number about all the marketing. And some people said they do. And I said, well, I think Kevin's right that most agents don't look at anything. They can't even read MLS instructions and understand how to present offers properly. So he might be right about the majority, but the people that are actually doing business, you should read this. This is another document you need to know frontwards and backwards so you can explain it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really, really powerful that way.
Agree.
So, with this, I see this agreement coming out. We know what to talk about here. You talked about getting an exclusive agreement signed. And I think agents need to understand there's different ways this is going to work. And it's probably the same as a listing for you. I'm curious what you think about this, Lisa. So, obviously you go to a listing appointment. Ideally, you get it at the price you want, the terms you want, and the commission you want, right? That's like the ideal scenario. And usually when that happens, it's because you completed a flawless appointment. You went through all the steps. You nailed it. You went in there. Lisa's smiling. She's got face number 2 on. She's ready to go. Bedazzles them. That's how it works with a listing. But then there's some listings where you have to meet the seller at their price. It might be a little high. Maybe you got to do something and negotiate the commission. Maybe you've got to take a shorter term listing. And buyer agreements are going to be the same way. So if you can deliver a flawless appointment, ideally you get them signed to an exclusive agreement and they want to work with you and they're committed and you've got that relationship. But there's going to be some where you need to test it out. Maybe it's like a shorter term, or maybe it's property specific and non-exclusive, and you got to earn the business as you go. We talk about this all the time with other parts of our business. This is just like listings. Lisa, how do you feel about that?
I've been saying that since this shook out. It is now what is going to level set and increase agent skill across the board, right? You're either a good salesperson with an amazing value prop, just like on the listing side. I remember a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago now, I said the same thing. Every agent, right? You and I go into a listing appointment and we say, look, every agent's going to tell you that they're going to have professional photography. They're going to post it in MLS. They're going to run an open house, yada, yada, yada. Right. And I think we're going to see the same pivot come up on the buyer side. Every agent's going to tell you that they're going to be at your beck and call to schedule showings. Every agent's going to tell you that they're a masterful negotiator, that they can, blah, right, word vomit about whatever it is. And I solidly come back to it's going to be exactly the same. There's going to be, if you sign this at 2%, 3%, 4%, whatever your numbers are, here's the different value adds that are provided, just like at a listing, right?
Mm-hmm.
At 2%, 3%, 4% on a listing commission. There's different services that are offered. And to your point, not all sellers want all those services. I was at a listing appointment with one of our agents a couple of weeks ago. Seller said, look, I'm going to pay 4%, 2% to you and 2% to the buyer agent. I don't care about your fancy Matterport, don't care about printed brochures, don't care about this, or this. I understand that I'm paying you to take the photos, put it in an MLS, your negotiation skills. You know what? The home is going to sell itself. The market is going to dictate what it's worth. They don't matter to me. You either want the listing for the 4% where you're keeping 2% or you don't. And if you don't, somebody else does. Heard, right? It's going to be the same thing on the buy side.
Yeah, and I mean, the people that don't want these services, I mean, that then either one, they're just never going to agree to it, and there's always a portion of the consumer base that's going to do things their way, no matter what happens, right, wrong, or otherwise, no matter what the benefits are. That's one part, right?
Yep.
Then you got the people that are willing to listen to what you have to say and are going to shop around, and then there's the folks that are going to work by referral, and they have a lot of trust and they want professional services, and that's where 65% of sellers identify their agent is by proximity, connection, referral, someone they know. So there's going to be all three of those groups, and you've got to know how to present to each one of them. I think that's the big difference here. And most people, they like that, when you have a one singular lead pillar business, you're in a dangerous spot. I only work by referral, Lee. So that was like a badge of honor for a lot of agents. And that can be a successful business model. Don't get me wrong. But when the market starts to go a little sideways or people are locked in like we've seen now, you've got to have other lead pillars because you become vulnerable and everyone's circle is going to be different. So you've got it. Like, I can't stress this enough. If you're not practicing your presentation on this, you're in for a rude awakening come mid-July when you're going to have to do this. And the best organizations, I know you're doing it. We're doing it. Byron's team's doing it. We're practicing this stuff now, testing it, because something's going to go wrong with this. Like, it's not going to go perfectly, well. And you're going to run into objections. You're going to run into challenges. But if you're waiting until mid-July to do this when you have to, it's kind of like the people that sat around and didn't do anything during the COVID shutdowns and just waited for the market to open up. They weren't ready, and it took them a month or two to kind of get in the swing of things. You want to prepare for what's to come. We know what's happening here. So I'm a big believer that you get a presentation down, practice your points of difference, rep it with some people. Then you have time to test it because you still have the opportunity to still go out, maybe not get this signed right now, at least until mid-July, and still go out and sell a house. So you can kind of see what goes wrong and then unpack it and debrief it.
100%. Yep. Same page.
So that's all we got this week. I don't think there's much else to cover here. Lisa, you got anything you want to add here? I mean, you had your president's retreat. I'm curious how that went. I hope everything went well. You're taking a bunch of real estate agents to an exotic location. That's a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. But how did it go?
Oh, it was actually really fun. There was 14 of us out in Punta Cana celebrating a really successful 2023, kind of kicking back. It was funny. You know what I will say is always fascinating to me is everybody there was still working. Whether they were sitting by the pool, sitting at the beach, whatever it was, they were still negotiating deals. And, it's always fascinating. I think it's a hallmark of why they're so successful. They were able to relax, enjoy the time, spend time with friends and family and each other, but they didn't just totally shut it off and mail it in while they were there. So it was kind of fun to kind of see them in their element. I always like when I get to have time with my folks outside the office because you get to see them in a different light. And so that for me was super memorable. Lots of laughs. If you don't get to do it with your teams, I highly recommend it.
Well, I think that out of the office component is real because in real estate, I mean, there's a performance aspect, whether it's an appointment or you're in the office presenting or you're doing something else. You should have a sort of like an alternate ego when you go to work, at least in my view, especially in this business. So, one thing we didn't hit on, I want to come back to this. We were talking about it before the pod. We talked about proper prep. What about practicing writing offers? What are you doing there to support people? Because I think that imagine you get an agent that comes in, right? And you interview, you do all this stuff. Do you think that if you don't know how to write an agreement and really do it right, what are the risks involved with that now with this new buyer agency NAR settlement? Because I think this is something that, how many times you gotten an offer, Lisa, that was all screwed up, right? Like it's scanned sideways, missing all kinds of important information. The agency just I'm just talking about like basic 101 stuff. Is that something agents should be practicing along with their appointment?
100,000%. Yeah, we had a deal a couple of weeks ago. We had the sell side, and the offer came in, and a seller agent accepted the offer. Interestingly, after that offer was accepted, a better offer came in, and there was a little bit of regret kind of going on. Right,
Yep.
the better offer buyer agent was past deadline. Happens. Um, Interestingly, when we went back to look at the offer that was accepted, the buyer agent flip flopped the application date and the commitment date for the mortgage contingency. And the commitment date was set forth as the day after the offer was actually accepted.
Ooh.
Now, you and I know what happens in that case. There is no mortgage commitment the day after the offer is accepted. And unfortunately, when dates like that get totally missed, it's actually problematic, right? Because now buyer can't hit it. They're going to ask for an extension, right? Or to change the date. We know it was an error, right? And it was a
Mm-hmm.
stupid error. But what do you think the seller said in that
I
instance?
want the better offer. I know what the seller
Yeah.
said. And you know
Yep.
what? I would probably say that. You would any human is going to say that because
Yep.
that's why you have contracts in business and there's real money on the table here.
Yep. And so it's kind of interesting to kind of think about where small errors can really start to make a difference, especially now where that buyer is paying you thousands of dollars potentially out of their own pocket. So I'm actually, we were chatting before the pod. I'm holding agents to a whole new standard on this, writing offers. If it's your first offer, I want to see your face in the office. Treat it like a job, right? I don't want to get on the phone with you and walk through it. I want to sit with you face to face, side by side, so that we can go through and make sure that we fully understand the client's situation, the intel from the listing agent, that we can craft the most masterful offer
Mm-hmm.
in order to best represent that buyer. But it's also a skill set. And what I said to the agent this morning is, this is probably the most critical skill that you have as an agent. Because if you cannot draft an offer, you cannot earn income. If you cannot draft an offer that's going to get accepted, you cannot earn income. I don't care how many buyer agency contracts you can get signed. If
You
you
don't
can
get
get
paid
through,
for those.
right, you don't get paid until the offer is accepted and gets to the closing table. If you cannot draft an offer that gets accepted and gets to the closing table with proper contingencies and proper dates and proper terms, you never get a paycheck.
You know, it's funny you say that because the understanding of the agreement is an area where a lot of agents blow it off. Understand how to fill it out, what it means, what it says. You know, one of the things we do at our team, which DJ down in Florida gave me this idea, where they personally review contracts before they go out, and
Yep.
just like you're talking about, and we'll sit down. Brian, our sales manager, he'll say, it's not do it over a Zoom. I think you're absolutely right there. It's like, get your butt in the office. We got to do this right now.
Yep.
And we always do a mock offer when people come on, even if they're coming from another company, because you'd be surprised. I mean, I get agents coming from other companies and it's not their fault. They don't know any better. What do you mean I have to put together a closing cost estimate? Well, this is what Pennsylvania licensing law says. So I mean, it makes me nervous. You got the blind leading the blind in some cases. And we have a form they fill out where they talk to us about everything they're crafting in the offer. Because if you don't know what you're looking at, Lisa, you spend 15, 20 minutes playing detective and it takes longer. So, and if they can't communicate it to you, what's it going on between their client and when you present it to the listing agent, right?
Yep.
So it's a great test. And then once we get through that, you need to know what are the deadlines? What are the timeframes? And we have a great staff here that audits all the paperwork and make sure that situation that you talked about doesn't happen. And I've been on the other side of this. I remember this vividly. It was a really tough expired listing. And I asked the agent, we get it sold. I'm on the listing side. And the seller was tough, not cooperative. We sell it. He's like mad we sold the home. I'm like, all right, dude, whatever. And like, what did you hire me for? Like, I sold it in 2 weeks. It's been on the market 3 years. You're welcome. But that's not how it went. And they put a mortgage commitment date in there of a week. And I said, is this pre-committed? Oh, yeah. It's pre-committed. Are you absolutely crystal clear we can get this? And it goes on and on. Then the house has stucco issues, right? The seller fixes all the stucco issues. That you think that would be the big hurdle. They go out, they repair it all in time, but they didn't like the settlement date. They thought it was too fast. And they said, you know what? We're blowing out of the deal because they didn't deliver their mortgage commitment. I talked to my attorney and I sold the attorney's dad's house, which is even fun. Like, I mean, all and the attorney's like, well, do whatever you want. And I'm like, oh my God, I have no control over the situation at this point. And all because they didn't put in the right mortgage commitment date. I'm a big believer you want it like 2 weeks before settlement, not a week afterwards, unless you're pre-committed, because these lenders also suck and never get you anything on time unless you're working with your local person. So a couple cautionary tales there on properly preparing your paperwork.
Well, to your point on that, it's such a fine balancing act, right? With crafting a strong offer that's likely to get accepted while being realistic. But the other side with those commitment dates that are so quick after the turnaround, what if your buyer loses their job in between, right? We've had one of those come up and the deposit is blown, and those are tough situations, but I don't know. It's a balancing act. To your point, I'm in the same spot. 7 to 10 days before closing, and as long as it's not like a 60-day closing, we're often totally fine in that respect.
Usually 30 days or 2 weeks right before. I mean, if it's a 60-day, we'll do it a little sooner. But the point is, like, you got to know what the lenders are going to do, because I will tell you something about lenders. They do not care about the deadlines in the contract.
Nope.
They blow them off like it's not a big deal. And I've had to we just had a place close. It was for a client of mine's parents, and it had expired. Like, they were a little stressed out, and the lender's like, and it's with a company, and it's, hey, we're a pretty big company, we close lots of loans. I'm like, well, did you read the deadline that you had to meet in the contract? I don't know, it's fine. I'm like, it's not fine. Yeah. The seller can terminate the agreement, and I'm not even working with the buyer at this point. The other agent's nowhere to be found. I'm helping out our agent who's managing the listing, and they just don't care. And I'm like, look, I have to be very clear with you. You will lose this application and this sale if you don't produce this in time. I know all that. And I'm like, I don't know that you do. This is the third extension. Are you going to yes me to death, or are you going to deliver? It's in underwriting. Get it to, and I don't like being aggressive like that, but with some of these lenders, they just do not care about your deadlines. And that's knowing how to get the deal to the table, because you really have to finesse those things and manage these people. It's like one other pawn in the whole mix, and it's out of your control to a certain extent, which is frustrating.
Yep. I'll add one last one, is that agents need to understand what the dates are and make sure that their clients understand the dates, not just the lender. We just had a listing buyer got a denial, couldn't get the loan. Here nor there whether the denial came within the commitment date, but we pushed back and said there's an application date in Massachusetts contract.
Yes, same here.
Okay. And so we said, let us see the dated application to prove that we were within the application date. Guess what? We weren't.
Yep.
The contingency is void at that point, because we didn't comply with the full contingency as it is. And it's, again, that one we rep the seller in that one as well. And the pushback to the poor buyer agent is, you should have coached your client, made sure when you were writing that offer, they understood what their obligations were. Very expensive lesson that will be learned by both that buyer and that buyer agent.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, because I think some people treat these as lackadaisical, and they don't
100%.
understand these are real contracts. And like, you and I aren't dealing with like some contract that was like drawn up by an attorney. This is a statewide agreement. So It's not a skill filling it out, as we can tell. I would say it's a skill knowing the dates and the deadlines and knowing all your obligations in the contract. That's something knowledge brokers should be studying. And if you're not familiar with that in your state, I would spend the weekend reading through the agreement of sale 2, 3, 4 times and knowing exactly what it says. I mean, you can go, I can give you numerous examples where you're talking with veterans in the business and they're saying, no, that's not the case. I'm like, all right, I'm going to call the PAR legal hotline right now and get this verified for you. Cause then it's like, you're having to interpret the English language to people, which is bananas. So, this paperwork stuff, it's not a joke, and it costs people money, like you said. And, it's not my job to keep the other side compliant. I work for the client, and I'm here to get the deal done. And that's really what it is. So I think that's a valuable lesson here, especially as we go into this new era of NAR settlement post mid-July. Buyers are going to have questions about this stuff because they're signing things a lot sooner instead of like, oh, Lisa, I like the house, let's go get it. Like, because that's usually what happens right now. They're going to be looking at things in advance. I'd argue you want to give your clients the agreement of sale to read through before they even write an offer.
It should be part of your buyer consult.
It's part of ours is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yep. All right. I do have to wrap. I have some coming up commitments. But one last thing. Next week, Damian Eales from Realtor.com joining us on the pod. I'm excited for it. We were texting back and forth with the folks over at Realtor.com this week, asking for the questions. And I loved Byron's response, which is, No canned questions here, open dialogue. So
Yes.
huge Realtor.com fan, huge Damian Eales fan. So excited to have him here. I think that he's going to bring a ton of knowledge, content, and information for everybody who listens to this pod. So if you haven't already subscribed, do so that you are in the know when Damian joins us next week.
CEO of Realtor.com. We are getting the best guests here on Knowledge Brokers. Can't miss episode. Hopefully Byron doesn't dominate the entire conversation like he normally does. I'll make sure we have our questions prepped, but they will not see them, just like Kevin Sears. This is not pre-screened or anything like that. So we'll be back next week. Go get that knowledge.
We know that in 2024, your business operations will be more important than ever. Once I figured this out, my business was able to scale and take off. See, generating leads is one thing, but getting that deal across the finish line while keeping everyone happy is another story. Enter Mosaic, everything you need once a lead becomes a client. Mosaic picks up where CRMs leave off to streamline the client experience and maximize your productivity. It's the operating platform that gives agents and teams everything they need to stay organized and proactive throughout the entire transaction process and beyond. Transaction management, forms, AI-powered collaborative search, client retention capabilities, and advanced analytics for your business. In other words, you can use Mosaic to create a powerful flywheel for your business. It will help you close every deal, boost your profitability, and generate more repeat and referral business. If you need a better way to run your business, check out the link below and learn how Mosaic can help you today. At BAMX, we listen to what real estate professionals want and need. That's why our platform is filled with sought-after courses, content, and tactical assets for your business. And that's why we launched BAMX in a box with templates and scripts done for you, delivered each Friday. The best part? It's not coming from panel pontificators who bought their followers and don't sell any real estate. It's coming from top agents, team leaders, and content creators in the industry. It's education that actually shows you how to do what you need in today's market. And now it includes editable templates and scripts so you can easily deliver that knowledge to your database. Every day, we continue to add more content into BAMX, into our private Facebook community, content that works, content that our members have exclusive access to daily. Do not wait any longer. Use code KNOWLEDGEBROKERS and join the thousands of agents taking their business to the next level today. Use Knowledge Brokers for 10% off. See you in BAMX.